All right. All right. This is week one, and we will be talking about ghosts. And in particular, we're going to be talking about the history of ghosts, an overview of the history of ghosts. All right. First question, obvious. What is a ghost? Well, generally speaking, it's a soul and or a spirit of a conscious being, human or animal, Interesting. So what's a distinction? What is the difference between a soul and a spirit? It's a good question, isn't it? Well, let's look at a soul. And I should first mention that many people use the term soul and spirit interchangeably. So they'll oftentimes say the soul has left the body in the same way as they mean the spirit has left the body. It's the individual. So they're talking about the ethereal, non-material aspect of the person that leaves the body, and they will use the term interchangeably. However, the two terms do have etymological differences. They are different. Let's look at the word soul. What is the word soul? All right, soul comes from the Old English word. What is it? Soul. All right, so soul. Soul means it's the emotional part of an individual, or the their personality. So it's their personality, who they are. Spirit, however, spirit comes from the Latin word spiritus, and that is loosely translated to mean breath. All right, so we got breath. So instead of being the specific aspects of the individual, what makes the individual, it's what makes up that thing, that phenomenon of the emotional. Let me give you an example. It's kind of like a house. By the way, I'm terrible at drawing. I'm just kind of giving you some visual, some visual features to kind of look at. So we have the house. What the house is. So the house is the soul of this thing. Right? But the spirit or spirits, probably heard the word spirits, is the brick and mortar. It's like the bricks, the shingles, terrible, I know, and other aspects that actually physically make it up. So the soul is what that thing is. The spirit is what makes that thing what it is. Okay. Some people might try to say that the spirit would be the body, but what we're talking about here is what makes the actual personality. I mean, when you look at a body, a dead body, you don't say it has a personality to it. But when it has personality, when it's in motion, when it's doing things, there's this element to it that makes it what it is. And what makes that up is the breath, or the, let's say, the brick and mortar of the personality and the emotional aspect of that individual. All right, I'll just kind of briefly on that. I should probably briefly explain that from a materialist perspective, or physicalist perspective, or an atheist who doesn't believe that the soul or the spirit exists outside the body. Kind of a brief note on that. The atheist can still say that the soul and the spirit exist. So the soul and the spirit do exist, right? But they don't exist in the same way that ontologically. Right? They don't exist ontologically, which is real. What makes something real? What makes it actually there? It exists kind of like categorically. It's like a categorization. It's in order for us to understand. If people didn't exist, lots of people, if they didn't exist, then that wouldn't exist. It's only in a community of people that you have a soul and a spirit. And the community of people is the language we use, the way that we categorize things. But if you don't have people, you're not going to have that. So what we're talking about is, regardless of whether people exist these elements still exist. All right. So there's still souls and there's still spirits, even if there's not a community to describe it and to categorize it. So I just wanted to make that distinction that a ghost, as far as we're talking about, a ghost means something that really exists. Real. It's not just a categorization of someone, but it's real. All right. Let's talk about, now that we've talked about the abstract, what type of evidence would we use to support the idea that they exist really and not just as a category? Well, let's look at the evidence. So we got evidence. All right. There's different types of evidence, and we'll get into that. But for now, let's just say, of course, you see. You see a ghost, right? So you see it. That's one form of evidence. Another is you hear it. It says something like ooh, ah, or whatever. I don't know, whatever ghosts say. And you feel it. Actually touches you, right? So it touches you. You feel it. And there's no other explanation. Of course, that's assuming that we can eliminate all other possibilities physically, that you saw something, you heard something, and you felt something that would not be explained otherwise by some other explanation. So, evidence. Do we need evidence? Let's look at whether we need evidence or not. That's a good question. All right. So that brings up two other perspectives. For example, and we'll go over this again as well, but as far as paranormal investigators, they insist that we need evidence, and that's why they do what they do, is to prove that ghosts exist. So you have evidence or evidentialist versus non-evidentialist. Okay, the evidentialist is going to be empirical, and which means it's objective. It's something that everyone can see, everyone can feel, everyone can touch. So it's about the five senses, right? It's everything the body can feel. It's empirical. It's objective. It's objective, let's see, which means that all people can feel it. Another thing, this is very important, is it's a posteriori. That's a really big word, isn't it? And what that means is it's after experience. God, I cannot draw with a crap. Sorry about that. I can't write. My writing's different. So that means it's after experience. So what that means is that you account for it after you've experienced it, right? So as soon as it comes into contact with you, that's when it's available to, or that's when evidence is available to other people to prove or to disprove what you experience. Non-evidentialist is different. It's non-empirical. Right? That means it's not based on the senses. I'm not sensing it, right? It comes from the mind. It comes from the mind. It's mental. It's not bodily, right? So it comes from the mind. It's something you're thinking about. And it's a priori. And that's a big word. It means before experience. And what that means is it's not touching my body. I'm thinking about it before I even feel it. Or I may not feel it at all. So that would be like a memory. I'm remembering someone in my past. I'm thinking of someone that's passed away now. That would be a priori, or anything in the mind. Someone, let's say, not a memory, but just in the mind itself. Like I'm not remembering somebody that was in my past, but I'm having a mental image in my mind of something that I've never experienced before. That would also be a priori. And that would be from a non-evidentialist perspective. Now, science obviously can't touch that. That goes before science. We can't prove or disprove that. That would have to reflect one's philosophical views. Okay, so let's go from that. All right. So we have evidentialists and non-evidentialists, and one's a priori, one's not a priori. Let's get into paranormal investigators. Paranormal investigators are typically interested in evidence, right? They're evidence-based. All right, so they're evidence-based, and they're looking for facts. They're looking for, actual evidence, which would be the see, hear, feel, right? So they're looking for those elements, those things that are touching the body, those things that are affecting the body, those things not only affecting but affect and effect in the physical environment, and that would include like dominoes. Dominoes. When one domino hits another domino and they fall. That's the same way with this. If I touch this and move this chair, I'm moving that chair over there, then that's an effect in the physical environment. So not only are they looking for something that their body can be affected by, but something that's in the physical environment. So they're trying to collect evidence of these things called ghosts that are doing these things. So that would be evidence. And I could go over different perspectives. There's positivistic and non-positivistic, but we won't go into that right now. We'll go into that later. For now, let's go with the history of ghosts. Okay, so with paranormal investigators, they're looking for evidence, right? Physical evidence of how ghosts are affecting the environment. Where does this idea of ghosts come from? Is it just something that modern man is made up, created? They got bored and there's nothing for them to do, so they just started thinking, dude, I wonder if when someone dies, like their aura, like some hippie or something, like some prehistoric hippie is like going, I wonder if like some aura just floats away and they're smoking some sort of weed and taking some sort of hallucinogen. Maybe they're thinking that, I don't know. But prehistoric humans, I was about to say man, prehistoric humans and humanoids, other species that were like humans, like Neanderthal, they used to bury their dead. Well, I'm not going to draw it, but they would bury their dead just like we do. Also, other species, elephants and some other species of animals actually, not necessarily bury their dead. I think some of them actually might to some extent, but I know they put their dead in specific areas, like a mound or something, a graveyard, like the elephant graveyard. But they're basically putting them there. And that certainly suggests that what they're doing is honoring the dead. So what's honoring the dead man mean? Well, it just means that they're recognizing that these dead things have something that has left them, and they're honoring the bodies that used to house that thing, the soul or spirits. So it used to house that, so they're honoring the vessel where that used to be. All right? So the fact that over the centuries, over the millennium, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, species have honored the dead. Now, all civilizations have honored the dead in some way, shape, or form, even after we've evolved to Homo sapiens. The development of experiencing ghosts go back to ancient Mesopotamia. So some of the earliest stories we have of these disembodied, souls and spirits go back to Mesopotamia, which is ancient civilization. Some of the actual accounts, we could go through some of the ancient accounts. One of the most famous was by Pliny the Younger, which was in ancient Greece, and actually Rome, but it was the Hellenistic Empire, Hellenistic culture. A Stoic philosopher named Athenodorus bought a house, and had a ghost in it. And he built his library in one of the rooms where there was evidently a lot of activity going on. because he wanted to investigate. He was probably the first paranormal investigator, at least the first one we know of in stories. He noticed that this disembodied spirit that he was seeing it, right? That disembodied spirit was performing a particular ritual. It was doing something it would come out, walk outside, and it would point to a certain spot. And every night it would do that. So Athenodorus, being a philosopher, figured out that there must be something there. Maybe that's where he's buried. This ghost is buried, and he's trying to tell him he needs to be honored in a much better way than just thrown in some sort of, undisclosed grave. So he digs him up, takes a shovel, digs it up, and he finds a skeleton. So that was, I guess, some of the first earliest evidence of a ghost by Athenodorus, as told by Pliny the Younger, which was many, many years before he was around. Now, although Athenodorus and many of the ancient Greek and Roman philosophers were able to distinguish between the physical and the non-physical, a majority of people that just ordinary average folk couldn't figure out the distinction. So whenever they saw the body, they assumed the soul was there. So many of the ancient or traditional folk tales of ghosts were of corporeal bodies. So it wasn't a ghost, it was a body that would come back, kind of like a zombie vampire. You think of that. So they came out of the grave and they would actually come to the living. So it was corporeal, it was physical. It wouldn't just pass through walls, it would actually touch the walls. So some of the earliest stories were of that. Now, I don't think people had any experiences like that other than, of course, the story of Jesus and some other stories of resurrected bodies, but which I'm not even sure it was an actual physical body. It was more like a super physical. But let's just assume, for the folk tales told of ghosts that were physical, and that's where the stories of the Strigoi, I can't remember how it's pronounced, vampire zombies came from. So they came from ancient folk tales that couldn't distinguish between spirit and soul, which classical philosophers had talked about. They couldn't understand that. But after the Enlightenment, once the ordinary average person knew about this, and they discovered that bodies don't normally come to life, many of those stories of vampires and things like that began to wane, and they began to become less and less frequent. This is when we saw a rise in spiritualism. So spiritualism was a movement going back to about the 17th century, or I'm sorry, 18th century, and beyond, where individuals started gaining interest in spirits, in the study of spirits after someone died, and trying to contact them, trying to, not necessarily investigate them, but communicate with them, and establish relationships with them in some way, and gain knowledge from them. So spiritualism became a thing, and that was post the folk tales then. So that's pretty much the history. It's quick. I know it's not extensive, but that is pretty much the history of ghosts and what ghosts are in essence. We're going to go more into detail week by week. So this was just week one. It's just a brief historical overview of various perspectives of ghosts. But what we're going to do is go week by week. As I said, we're going to study like memory theory or memory perspective. That when we were talking about the different perspectives, one was non-evidentialistic or non-evidentialist, which would be memory, something in your mind. So that's one theory of ghosts, that it's just memories that we have, or there's some sort of collective unconscious in a Jungian sense that serves as the phenomena of ghosts that people experience. Another one we'll talk about in another week is our energy. Is the idea that their energy, that our bodies have this aura, kind of getting into hippie thing where it's energy and it relates to physics and things like that. So there's some science to it. That's the kind of traditional view you'll see in a lot of popular paranormal investigators. They hold to this. Another one will be altered states of consciousness, and this will be seeing ghosts as nothing more than just pseudoscience. That would be the evidence is just simply not there. The evidence, if anything, shows that people are mistaken. It's mistaken identity. It's not a ghost. It's just something's wrong with their mind. They thought they heard something. There's something in our evolutionary past which inspires us to see things that aren't there. But so there's altered states of consciousness. Another one's astral bodies. Now, astral bodies is a perspective that has to do with the idea that the soul or the spirit has another type of body. So it's not. It has to be, in other words, the soul and the spirit have to be embodied in something. So once this body dies, or if you purposely can pull your astral body out of it, it comes out and it journeys to other planes of existence and things like that. It's very, very speculative. We'll go into that though. I think there's something to that to speak on, but I don't know if there's a lot of science behind it. Obviously, then the next week we'll talk about spiritualism and the Victorian and pre-Victorian era of ghosts. Lastly, we'll speak about the religious perspective, particularly in Christianity, how many in the Christian community and other religious communities see ghosts not as disembodied spirits of people, but as demons, as non-human entities that have never had a body or physical body in our sense. They may have some sort of body, but maybe it's an astral body or whatever, I don't know. But they basically are not human. They're not humans that had died, and they are posing as humans in order to trick us or to deceive us or whatever. And then lastly, we're going to do an overview. So you'll watch these lectures, you'll review the materials, write a brief 250 to 500 word response. It doesn't I don't care if it's even if it's shorter than that, just as long as you're getting the you're expressing the essence of what it is each week is addressing, just as long as you're able to accurately articulate what we're talking about. Then let's see, for each module you'll do that. At the end of the course, you're going to write a 2 to 4 page paper kind of reviewing what you've learned, and I'll have a brief quiz at the end. So I look forward to seeing you next week. I hope you'll enjoy some of the resources that I'll have, and I look forward to reading your responses. So have a good week.